Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Welcome to college football season. We officially have our first weird internet story that might be a scandal, but might not be a scandal. This thing's been floating around for 24 hours. I didn't know what to do with it, but let's go ahead and get into the saga of John Mateer. Okay, so John Mateer, I think if you're watching this show, you're a college sports fan, you know, Oklahoma last year was not good, or I take that back. They were 6-7, so that's not good. That's not acceptable. Defense was top 20 nationally. The issue was the offense was a mess, entirely new O-line, wide receivers get hurt, Jackson Arnold starts, Jackson Arnold get benched, he gets put back in. End of the season, it becomes pretty clear that they just need to start over fresh on the offensive side of the football. They fire Seth Luttrell. They bring in, Seth Luttrell was the offensive coordinator. They bring in Ben Arbuckle as the offensive coordinator, who, of course, was at Washington State, top 10 defense. And in a story that's true 2025, the great thing about hiring a high-profile offensive coordinator is that with the transfer portal, you can bring the quarterback with you that help lead your offense. So it's almost a package deal. That's exactly what happened, because days after Ben Arbuckle agreed to be the new offensive coordinator at Oklahoma, his quarterback from Washington State, John Mateer, followed him to Oklahoma. John Mateer, one of the most prolific quarterbacks in all of college football last year, and he and Ben Arbuckle are the guys that are basically tasked with being the new faces and the new whatever to get Oklahoma's offense back on track, okay? So John Mateer, high-profile quarterback transfer. Listen, some people have him as like a Heisman finalist. A couple people have picked him to basically lead Oklahoma to the top of the SEC, whatever. The bottom line is, though, it's been a quiet fall camp in a good way out of Oklahoma, at least until Monday night. And I saw this story pop, and I didn't really know what to do with it, right? So Monday night, I start seeing all these little tweets about John Mateer and Venmo and John Mateer and what does it mean in Venmo? What does it mean? This and that. Well, I bring it up because as I looked into it, what became clear was this. We had a story that could only happen in college football because someone on Twitter leaked something from John Mateer's Venmo account. As a matter of fact, producer Matt, you might as well just pop it up right now. So the first thing that kind of popped up over the course of Monday night, you can see on the screen not messages, but two payments from John Mateer's Venmo that are quote unquote tied to sports gambling from November 20th, 2022. Sports gambling, USC, UCLA. All right. So a couple things on that. First of all, listen, just because he put sports gambling in the memo on Venmo does not mean that that was actually what he did. And beyond that, when I saw it, it didn't register that this could be a thing. But as time went on, a couple things stood out. First of all, and let me just say this before we even get into John Mateer specifically, because I have to explain this every single time somebody is busted, or somebody is even accused. I don't want to say busted, but accused in the sports gambling space. It is a big deal. It does matter, and let me explain why. Anytime that you are in theory betting on a sport that you're participating in, John Mateer was a true freshman at Washington State, not playing in the fall of 2022. And I'm not saying that he was betting. I'm just giving you the context, okay? So fall of 2022, John Mateer is at Washington State. There is a Venmo screenshot of his Venmo account that basically says that he paid somebody a couple bucks for sports gambling. In theory, that shouldn't be a big deal. But anytime that you play a sport and you are alleged to be involved with gambling on that sport, it becomes a big deal. You might personally might not think it's a big deal. I might not. It's not up to me. It's not up to you. We all, in some way, shape, or form, dabble in sports gambling, okay? We've worked with the sports gambling companies. We've done March Madness pools. I'm not saying it is the worst thing that has ever existed on the face of the earth. But whenever you are actively participating. And to be clear, I'm not saying John Mateer was, but whenever you're actively participating, it is something that is going to raise red flags because the sports gambling industry is so big. And the one thing that the sports gambling companies don't ever want is the belief or thought that any game could be hypothetically compromised, right? I'm not saying John Mateer did anything wrong. I'm not saying he even sports gambled. What I am saying is if there's even the impression that that happened, they have to look into it. And in theory, all of these leagues do as well, because obviously, whether it was the Pac-12 in 2022, whether it was the the SEC in 2025, no league wants to. You can't have sports gambling involved. You just can't. And we say this all the time, right? You can bet on anything else. If you're 21 years old of legal age and you're a college football player, you can bet on baseball. You can bet on tennis. You can bet on golf. You can't bet on a sport that you play in because it gives the impression that things could be compromised. And for people that say, well, he didn't hypothetically in this case allegedly bet on his own team, the argument is always when you're betting on a sport that you play, could you have inside information? Could you have friends on the team? Whatever. So that's the caveat on why sports betting matters. Now let's get back to John Mateer, because again, when I saw this, I didn't really know what to make of it. And I was like, oh, is this one of these internet stories that, starts on a message board and it becomes nothing? Then I wake up on Tuesday and it's definitely a thing. Pete Thamel is tweeting about it, talking about, Oklahoma is aware of the allegations. John Mateer denies any wrongdoing. Then we hear that John Mateer is going to release a statement about this. And so let's get you caught up on what has happened within about the last hour or so, as both John Mateer and Oklahoma have released individual statements. By the way, this is an important part I should have mentioned earlier. Basically, the internet sleuths basically did confirm that was John Mateer's Venmo account. Now, just because he typed in sports gambling into the transactions doesn't mean that it was actually sports gambling, but it was John Mateer's Venmo account, at least as far as I can tell. Let's get to statements from both Oklahoma and John Mateer. Producer Matt, I don't know if you have them in any order. I'll take the Oklahoma statement if you have it first. Perfect. Thank you, sir. So he said, Oklahoma released a statement that says OU Athletics provides ongoing education to its student athletes, coaches, and staff on matters related to sports gambling. The department utilizes Prohibet, which is an industry standard service offering comprehensive monitoring of sports gambling. OU takes any allegations of gambling seriously and works closely with the NCAA in any situations of concern. OU Athletics is unaware of any NCAA investigation and has no reason to believe there is one pending. From there, and we'll get to both statements in a second, John Mateer released his own statement saying, quote, "The allegations that I once participated in sports gambling are false. My previous Venmo descriptions did not accurately portray the transactions in question, but were instead inside jokes between me and my friends. I have never bet on sports. I understand the seriousness of the matter, but I recognize that taken out of context, those Venmo descriptions suggest otherwise. I can assure my teammates, coaches, and officials at the NCAA that I have not engaged in any sports gambling." So listen, big deal, little deal, no deal. It's something. When Oklahoma and John Mateer have to release a statement, it means that it's at least in the public consciousness. Doesn't mean that John Mateer did anything wrong. Doesn't mean that John Mateer gambled, but it means something. But I want to break down each of those statements because to me, I think there's important context in each of them. Let's start with the Oklahoma statement, okay? The Oklahoma statement is the biggest piece of word salad that I have ever seen. If you read the statement, all it says is this: we work with industry, we take every allegation seriously. We work with Prohibet sports betting and industry standard offering comprehensive monitoring of sports gambling activities. OU takes any allegations seriously. OU is unaware of any NCAA investigation, has no reason to believe one is pending, okay? All that says to me is this: OU is trying to distance itself from any wrongdoing. OU basically said, look, we work with a industry leading, gambling company, blah, 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 this and that, whatever. And if anything happened, we did everything we could to stop it. I also think it's worth noting, just because Oklahoma is working with any company now, or even if they were working with them in 2022, that has little to do with what John Mateer may or may not have been doing in 2022 in Pullman, Washington. Okay. Again, we're not accusing anyone of anything, but Oklahoma's statement is just basically saying, like, look, we educate our athletes, we whatever. But John Mateer wasn't on campus when these Venmo transactions happened. So, like, you can't sit here and say, like Oklahoma's just basically saying we had no wrongdoing at all. Now, let's get to the John Mateer statement, because to me, this is much more interesting. And I will say this. If you want to see someone get dragged on Twitter, go to my Twitter at Aaron_Torres, because there are a lot of people that are unhappy with what I said. But let's get to the John Mateer statement, because this is, to me, the most important part, okay? So let's keep in mind. Matt, pop up actually first the Venmo transactions. So it says, so we have two transactions. One says sports gambling. One says sports gambling UCLA versus USC November 20th, 2022. Okay. So now let's go back to the Mateer statement. Mateer said, quote, my previous Venmo descriptions did not accurately portray the transactions in question, but were instead inside jokes between me and my friends. Okay, let me say this. I understand that Venmo transactions aren't always exactly what, people don't always put in what they actually did, right? Whatever, I don't know. You go to a liquor store, you're under 18, you say food, you know what I mean? Like I understand, because I will tell you, I'm getting skewered on Twitter right now, basically for the insinuation that I made. But what I will say is this. It feels very weird to me that it would be an inside joke, not only sports gambling, but beyond that. How about this? Sports gambling on UCLA versus USC. A payment is made under that transaction 1 day after those two teams played. All you got to do, just Google it, baby. USC and UCLA played on November 19th, 2022. John Mateer has a Venmo transaction November 20th, 2022 for UCLA versus USC sports gambling. And so the notion that this is some sort of weird inside joke, okay, maybe it is. Maybe they did something that they don't want in their Venmo transactions. By the way, if you're driving around with a kid in the car right now, just be aware. I'm going to go a little bit off script here. So I'm going to give you 3 seconds. If you don't want kids to hear what I'm about to say, not to say it, okay? 1, 2, 3. There are plenty of there are plenty of things that John Mateer might not have wanted on his Venmo transactions that he would put sports gambling instead. Maybe his friend bought beer for him and he's 18 years old and he can't say, hey, this is for those beers you bought. This is where it gets a little bit sketchy for the if there's kids in the car. Maybe they went to the strip club. Somebody slipped them $100 and said, go have fun. I don't know. Okay. I don't know what John Mateer was doing November 20th, 2022. At the same time, what I will say is it feels weirdly specific to just make up UCLA versus USC sports gambling 1 day after the game was played. And to take it a step further, here's the part that cracks me up. Because, like I said, I'm getting killed on Twitter because people are like, wow, you have no friends. Wow, I make up stuff on Venmo all the time. Okay, well, here's my thing. Let's say John Mateer really was paying somebody for some sort of something that wasn't sports gambling, right? Let's say it was the strip club. Let's say it was beer. Let's say it was whatever, okay? If the argument is he wouldn't be dumb enough to actually put in the Venmo transactions what the money was for, then wouldn't the argument also be that he wasn't dumb enough to put sports gambling when everyone knows that college football players cannot bet on sports betting? And so to me, what do I think the most realistic possibility is in this situation? Oh, I don't know. He was a 22-year-old redshirt freshman at Washington State playing in the Pac-12, having no belief ever that 3 years from now he'll be in the SEC and someone will be interested in his Venmo transactions. Like, I'm sorry if that makes me a square, that I think the most likely thing is that he bets some denomination of money on college football, and now he's trying to cover up for it. I'm sorry if that makes me a square. I'm sorry if it makes me a loser. But USC versus UCLA, a day after they played, feels weirdly specific if you're trying to cover something up. And then if you're trying to cover something up, don't you come up with something a little bit better than something that you know is against the rules? Because again, if you're smart enough to cover up what you're doing, then you're probably smart enough to know that sports gambling is against the rules. And so I could go on and on. But to me, this is the most likely situation. Now, I think the big question is, does anything actually happen from here? And this is, I think, a totally fair argument. Listen, I do think it's fair to say that it's going to be hard to prove that he actually did anything wrong. You listen, this could have been as simple as him and his buddies are on the couch watching the USC UCLA game. Hey, Johnny, well, his name's John, I guess, but hey, UCLA is going to win. I'll bet you $20. Okay, cool. I'll bet you. And then boom, next thing you know, he loses a bet and has to pay. So like, if it's just a straight, word of mouth bet, whatever, then yeah, there's probably no way the NCAA can prove it. And to the Oklahoma statement, there's probably no way they can even investigate that, right? But what I will say, if they take it seriously, I think there's going to be some sort of follow-up here. Now, to be clear, maybe it was a totally bogus line items on his Venmo. Maybe he really did, maybe his buddy did go get him beer and he didn't want to put beer in the Venmo transactions when he's an 18-year-old freshman, okay? But what I will also say is, as somebody who knows people in law enforcement and knows people in technology, it's going to be pretty easy to just track some stuff and figure out if there was any real sports gambling involved, right? It'll be pretty easy to track who he sent that Venmo transaction to. It'll be pretty easy from there to see if that person has any sort of DraftKings or FanDuel or whatever account. And then it'll probably be pretty easy to track if they were betting on games the night before or whatever. And so again, one, I obviously understand that there is the possibility that nothing happened. There's the possibility that this was a total, bogus line item because he doesn't want people to know that he's buying beer, or that he was at the strip club, or that he was doing whatever, that, he bought flowers for a girl that's not his girlfriend. I understand that that's all a possibility. But I'm sorry, if it just said sports gambling, okay, but it says sports gambling USC versus UCLA a day after the game was played, I think you probably gambled on the game. Now, is it the end of the world? Probably not. Can the NCAA prove it? Probably not. Is he going to miss time? I don't think so. By the way, producer Matt has proposed a one-game suspension for the SEC opener against Auburn last weekend of September. We'll take it to Greg Sankey. I don't know if that's going to happen. By the way, people don't know, producer Matt is an Auburn fan. But listen, it's a story. It's something. And I don't think this is the last. Like, again, if you looked at my Twitter mentions, you'd say, oh, this is a nothing story. Nothing's ever going to happen from here. I just don't know that I believe it. So we'll monitor this. Like I said, I'm not going to sit here and say that it's the end of the world. The season is over. He's suspended for the rest of his career. But like, if this goes up the totem pole, if this goes up the flagpole, and they found out that he's gambling, I mean, he could be looking into suspension. So we'll see what happens. Don't want to put the cart before the horse, but I'm not going to pretend like this is a nothing story, because it could potentially be something no matter what my Twitter mentions say.